Hello and welcome to the fandom track here at ConTinual, and we are talking about food today. In fact, we are talking about holiday cooking with pride. So food, the LGBTQ community, connections, family, friendsgiving, found family, all of that stuff with food. And here with me today, I'm your host, Gail Z Martin and Morgan Bryce, and my panelists here are going to tell you who they are, and then we'll get right into all the good food stuff. Ari, take us away.
Yes, you can actually call me Rachel, although even in 2020, we girls use our initials to fool people when writing. I am the author of the Rules Undying urban fantasy series and the False Icon series with Rick Walteri, and I'm just happy to be here because if there's one thing I can talk about, it's food. Anyone knows that.
Natania.
Hey, I'm Natania Barron. I'm an author of dark fantasy mostly and some other fun stuff in the meantime. My books are here, and I have a book coming out December 1st, which is a really interesting time in the world right now to be promoting a book, but it's an Arthurian feminist retelling of the King Arthur stories with Anna Pendragon, the missing sister of King Arthur, who's actually in the original sources and then disappears. So really happy to be here, love talking about food, and can't wait to hear our stories.
Awesome. Trisha.
Hello, I'm just writing down to look for Natania's book in December now. Hi, I'm Trisha Woolridge. I write as TJ Woolridge for my child-friendly stuff. I do mostly dark fantasy and horror with a little bit of science fiction mixed in. I'm part of the Don't Turn Out the Lights anthology, which is for anyone who grew up reading scary stories to tell in the dark. I have a cool scary horse story in that. I also am the editor for Wicked Women, which is coming out hopefully this Saturday. It is an anthology of New England women writing horror, and I'm really excited about that. Like, some of the stories literally gave me nightmares, and I don't have the cover with me to show you, but it's awesome.
Terrific. Michael?
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write horror, urban fantasy, and science fiction, all of which includes queer characters and queer themes. And I love to bake, so that's why I'm here.
That's fantastic. And I'm Gail Z Martin, and Morgan Bryce is Gail. I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, and more. And as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. So I have to admit, in all of my Morgan Bryce books especially, food is always there. Somebody is making lasagna, or they're going to visit Vic's huge Italian family in Pittsburgh, and there is just so much food. Or people are, in Myrtle Beach eating fresh seafood and loving it. Food is just always there. And I think we learn a lot about our characters through food, but honestly, I have a clue that we learn a lot about ourselves and each other and our community through food. So the title is Holiday Cooking with Pride. So let's talk about food memories and food connections to the LGBTQ community and memories, other things. So who wants to jump in first?
I can if you want.
Sure.
Mine is a little different because I grew up in the South with one born again parent and one that was excommunicated. So you can imagine how that worked out. For me, food was always the safety. We always said never talk about politics, religion, or anything unpleasant, but you could always talk about the food. So I think the only way I can really relate to my family is that I cook Thanksgiving for all of them because none of the rest of them can cook. And I also tend to do like a Friendsgiving on my found family, the people that actually know who I am and what I'm about. So I think it's like you can't hate somebody while you're eating with them. It's just a very communal, shared experience. And I think for some people that can't be as open as others, like at least you can have a good meal and talk to people and sometimes forget that you don't always agree.
Okay. Nathan?
So,
go ahead.
Okay. So I was going to jump in. Because I mentioned my husband, I like to throw out that I'm an invisible bisexual because I married a very cishet man. But we've
Same girl,
always
same.
Same.
so but the thing is, I met him at a Rocky Horror Picture Show party. I crashed it, and I was raised a very not really strict Catholic, but a mostly strict Catholic. I'd never heard of what this Rocky Horror Picture Show thing was. So of course I got dragged to this party, and that's where I met him. And we ended up spending a lot of time hanging out with the theater group who shared in college the group office space with the GLBT on campus organization. So pretty much, I mean, there's generally a large crossover in that anyway. So honestly, my first food things with that are toast related, if anyone's familiar with Rocky Horror. And like parties where we literally, and we're all broke in college, so we would bring cheap bread and put stuff on it for toast to snack on. And honestly, pizza parties for us. We'd all pitch in like $5 and get a giant pizza. And that was a very communal thing. We also ended up in college. So in college is where I really started exploring this. We also would have monthly, put money together, and either me or my husband would cook a meal. A few of our other friends would stick in. And again, our friend group was just a rainbow anyway. It just happened that way. So having these let me cook for you parties where we're not at the campus center, we're all in. We had suites in college. It was a very nice college, you must start with. So we had a working stove and like a living room setting. So we could all just put a little bit of money in and have a really nice sit down meal together and bond that way. And that kind of followed us forward. So our very first birthday party in college was in April, and most of our friends had March, April, May birthdays. So we had a massive food party for that. Again, most of it, we did do some presents, but most of it was we were all cooking for each other. That's also when I got proposed to. So every year since then, in the springtime, it's been a really big holiday for us to have a giant barbecue, potluck, something party. And again, because we have a lot of friends who are getting all parts of the rainbow, but also all parts of the food spectrum. We usually have a lot, we have to have vegan dishes. So, and we're both geeks. So it's always geek themed. This year was supposed to be, we were turning 42. So it was going to be the barbecue at the end of the universe. But making sure that every one of our friends would have something safe to eat, as well as being in a safe place, was very much part of how we plan any of our get-togethers, our parties. So food and just being inclusive for all things, I think to me has that aspect with food. I think I went off on a tangent. So, but that's where food and pride intersect with me, is like be inclusive of everybody's needs on all things.
Awesome.
I think my story is not quite so cheery, but I think one of the things this year that has really shaped kind of how I've looked back at my life and my hobbies is that I was recently diagnosed with ADHD. And it's been very, it really casts a different narrative on your whole life. And as a kid, I was very, very to myself. I was very introverted. And I know people who know me now are like, really? You were introverted? But I was incredibly introverted. I spent most of my childhood reading by myself. I had a few friends, but you know, the social interactions of everyone was always really kind of stressful for me. My family was kind of all over the place. My dad's family were well-to-do Jewish and Swedish people, and my mom's family were working class French Canadians. And so I had a very, very different, you know, Catholic, Jewish, then my parents were evangelical. So again, you know, kind of a different place, but I knew very young on that I didn't know what the word was, but I was queer because I would have crushes on girls and boys, and I kept it very, 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 very deep buried inside of me. But I think that was definitely one of the things. I know there's actually a correlation between queerness and ADHD, which I think is really fascinating, that our brains are just somehow wired a little bit not as neurotypical as the rest, which I think is fascinating. But for me, to get back to the main thing, when I was around the age of 11, kind of during the worst, 11 to 14, right? Like just the worst period of your life
Hell
ever.
yes.
I literally, I did all of my growing. I hit puberty really early. I've not grown an inch since I was 11. So I felt physically completely different from my peers. I didn't know who to, I just total hot mess. And in some ways I wanted to still be a kid, but I wanted to be an adult. And I discovered the joy of cooking in my mom's kitchen. And my mom cooks some wonderful French Canadian traditional food very well. My dad is a disaster. Like, never eat anything if he ever comes at you. He tried to be like gluten-free in the 80s and like health food in the 80s, and people don't understand what soy milk tasted like in the 80s, and I had to bring it to school. I like literally traumatized by having to bring lentil soup to school in first grade and being told that I was eating diarrhea. So I joke, my sister and I love to cook, and a lot of this comes from desperation. And I approached it like I approached an interest for me. I wanted to know, how does bread work? Like, how does a cake work? And what was amazing is that, you know, because I grew up in the 80s, the world was so much processed food that I was recreating dishes and I would give them to people, and their lives would change in that moment because they hadn't tasted a cookie that someone made homemade in so long. I made a scratch white cake for my mom once that was just vanilla cake with raspberry inside and vanilla frosting, and she burst into tears because it tasted like the cake that her mom used to make. And I had no idea. I just wanted to figure out how to do this. So I think for me, a lot of that, my identity as a queer person, was really a way to connect with people in a way that was comfortable. And food to me is a form of communication. So that's my sad loner story. It gets better though.
Oh, Dory, I'm gonna
Oh.
jump right in on the sad
Yeah.
end of things. I grew up in a family with 2 evangelical parents and lots of evangelical relatives and evangelical sisters and all kinds of fun stuff. There was like no way that I could be me and also live up to the rules that had been laid out for me. And our family was very, the place where I grew up and the family that I grew up in believed very strongly in moralizing around pleasure. And so food was the only acceptable pleasure. Food was the only way that you could enjoy something and be unabashed in your enjoyment of it. I guess you could enjoy things like church and be unabashed about it. But that always had a sort of very performative quality to it. Food was the only realm of pleasure where you could just like let go and enjoy yourself. And I found cooking fascinating, and I was lucky enough to grow up in a family of very talented cooks. My father was not a good cook. He couldn't handle seeing like raw meat and things like that. And we used to joke that if he watched rice boil, he'd have to go lie down for a while. So, you know, but he was also kind of a terrible cook. There was one thing he was really good at, and that was sawmill gravy, but otherwise, no. But my mother is a very talented cook and also tends to cook for family events as though 300 people are showing up. I remember the year that my sister and I had to talk her down from cooking a third ham for 7 people. So you just never know what you're going to get at my family's meals, but they're always good food. That said, there's like a lot emotionally that's negative that's wrapped up for me in things like family get-togethers and family holidays. And I discovered the ability to enjoy that sort of thing in college, actually. I was in a fraternity, but it's a very non-traditional fraternity. It was a co-ed fraternity. It was a very queer fraternity. We were a frat. We had to have a house and people lived there and everything. But you know, it was a very open and welcoming and diverse space. And we had our term for it, for various reasons, was St. Anthony Hall. And our meal plan we referred to as Antoine's. And if you signed up to cook Antoine's, then you were buying into the meal plan and you were volunteering to be one of the people who cook one night a week. And I really learned to come back to enjoying food and enjoying family meals as part of Antoine's in college. And that, you know, was an opportunity to celebrate found family. And these days, in the average year, this being a not average year, my big holiday food wise is not Thanksgiving, but the thing that most of my found family and I started doing, I don't know, 10 years ago, probably, when we all realized that we all hated Thanksgiving because we had to go spend it with our relatives. We would all come back from Thanksgiving on Friday, and then on Saturday have Friendsgiving. And I've always kind of in my head also thought the alternate title for ours could be Queersgiving, because it is a very queer found family and big, sprawling group of people. Lots of, oh, the person on the other end of this sequence of tables is the person who used to date the person who used to date the person who was my roommate in college, who used to date the person who's next to them. So that's sort of like a big Southern family experience, but purely like choice or connections that are made by choice. And that's been a really fun and powerful way for me to reconnect with that holiday in particular. And these days, because I'm a grown up, I don't have to go see my relatives Thanksgiving anymore. And Friendsgiving is what I get to do, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in grad school, a lot of people didn't cook, and I was willing to at least give it a shot. And so I would hold these, I always called them stone soup gatherings. There's a story about the guy who is a con man and he gets everybody to bring the ingredients, except I was the only one who owned a big pot. So I said, tell you what, I'll buy some chicken breasts. You're welcome to come. Everybody bring what you can. So people brought vegetables, people brought desserts, they brought snacks, and who cared if it matched? We put it all together. And so we had people from big cities and little cities and queer and straight and all kinds of ethnicities. And it was just fun because we got to eat, and it wasn't dining hall food. It wasn't fast food. It wasn't frozen dinners. It was nourishing food with a group of people who, just brought what they could, and it all somehow always worked. And so that's one of my memories with food. The other is that as I've lost people in my life, recipes become memories, and recipes become things that remind you of people who aren't with you anymore, whether that recipe is from them or not. It's something you have an association of that person with because you ate it with them, or it was served to you at their house. And then of course, maybe it's something that your mother or somebody else's mother made. And so I find that keeps those memories alive. When I make that recipe, then there's conversation about, oh, I remember eating this. There's just a sacramental element to it in terms of not religiously, but in terms of invoking something that is holy about those bonds among us. I remember the last time my husband's mother died right before Christmas, and the whole extended family came to her house. And since it was right before Christmas, everybody had time off, he asked that we please still all gather there. And so we did. And I remember the last time I put her silverware away. I'd done this for 20 some years. But the last time I wiped those forks and knives off before I put them back in the tray, there really was a sacramental element to it, that I felt this bond over these implements they were just silverware, but they had been part of so many good times and gatherings that they took on being more than what they were. And so I think that anybody who dismisses food as just food, yes, it is that from a caloric standpoint, go away. But it's so much more from an emotional standpoint and what it stands in for us in our minds. What are some of your favorite recipes that you like to share with people?
Let's see. I have a couple different
rattle
ones.
off all the ingredients. Just tell us about it and make our mouths water.
Okay, I have a couple different ones. The first one, speaking in the sacramental food memory for was so my dad could cook. My mom was not a very good cook. So come Thanksgiving, that was the big meal where my dad did 90% of everything. And he made a version of the Jones sausage stuffing that you can see on the Jones sausage, packages. But my mom hated vegetables. So he like cut the vegetables in half as many as what it said. But I love a sausage stuffing. So New England is very much a sausage stuffing kind of region. So when my husband and I got married, we had our first Thanksgiving, I was going to make my dad's stuffing, only I was going to actually include double the vegetables that that it called for, except I ran them through the Cuisinart so that they kind of melted in and my mom couldn't see them. So making a stuffing where I could make my mom eat her vegetables was a very good feeling. And I knew that even though it's not the healthiest thing in the world, the fact that I'm putting in as many vegetables as I am. So if many of the people who eat Thanksgiving and ignore the vegetables, they're getting some. So I like doing that. I like being able to sneak vegetables in. I do that with my meatloaf as well. That's one of my favorite recipes. The other one that I really like to do is one that we created, and it's barbecued pulled jackfruit. And the reason I like making it is we can make it vegan, gluten-free. We can make it in a way that all of our friends could eat it if they wanted to. Because we make all of our own sauces, spices, and it just is a really, really, if you've never had jackfruit, it's delicious. It has the consistency of like a slightly softer pulled pork. And it takes on the flavor of however you cook it. And it's very, very easy to make. So that is another one of my favorite recipes that I like to make. The other one, because I also host a Yule at my house, is I do either a lentil soup or a mushroom barley soup for the same reasons. I can make it vegan, I can make it gluten-free, I can not, make it so that everyone can eat it. And I do like the challenge of making a dish that does fit with anyone, whether they've got FODMAP, like I know that stands for a lot of things. And it still tastes good. And the people who complain about vegan or this, that, and the other don't know that they're eating something vegan because it tastes so good. So those are the kind of recipes that I like to make.
I go the opposite way. I had the battle of I'm like a half and half. I'm a Mason-Dixon line. My dad was from the north and my mom was from the south, but I was always cooking down there. And for some reason, I had a Southern family that couldn't handle greens. I didn't grow up eating them. I didn't like them, but I heard they were really good for you. So my first battle was, how can I make them not good for you? And one of this lovely old retired lady who was my best friend's great grandma, she made these. And I'm like, but these are good. What did you do to them? I said, I put bacon and peanut butter in them, darling. And at that moment, my whole world changed because I realized that if you put bacon and peanut butter in pretty much anything, it tastes good. And I managed to, and they said, whatever you do, do not make kale. So not only did I put collard greens in, I did kale. I got like 10 whole things of kale because it cooks down to nothing. And I made this huge batch, and I put in bacon and peanut butter, and the look on everyone's faces at that first Thanksgiving I cooked was like, but these taste good. So I converted an entire family at once to greens. And I do make there's actually a vegetarian version of it because smoked paprika and chestnuts sub in for all the pork. But yeah, I took that as a big win because there was one of my found family. My friend said, I don't know what sorcery you have, but you managed to make greens acceptable. And I think if you can make collard greens tasty to a Yankee, you can do anything in this world and bring anyone together. So that's my recipe I have to share.
Very true.
Sorcery indeed. And putting bacon with anything makes it better.
It's the peanut butter though. That's the trick because it makes them creamy.
Peanut butter.
Yeah, it adds a nutty subtleness, and you got to have a little kick of chili and finish it with enough vinegar that it makes you really pucker.
We're not
So
friends. I'm totally friending you and asking you for that recipe.
I have it saved.
And if you guys want to add the recipes to these in the comments once this goes live, go
Sure.
for it.
I can do that.
yeah. I think for me, so I mentioned I'm French Canadian on one half of my family, and that's the side of the family that we preserved a lot of our heritage food. And for me, it's kind of interesting that even though I have like 20 plus cousins, my mom's one of 8. I'm one of the only people that still cooks the food that we grew up with, because a lot of them just they don't really like it, or it's like hard to do or whatever. So every year, my mom and I and my sister get together and we make what's called tourtière, which is a meat pie. And meat pie in Canada and Quebec is the holiday food. You cook it before Thanksgiving. You make a ton. We made up to 50 pies before, and it takes all day. You cook it down. It's pork and beef and onions, and you cook it down with clove and cinnamon and a little bit of nutmeg and tons of salt and pepper. And you cook it and cook it and cook it and cook it. And then there's just this magical moment where you taste it and you go, it's ready. And you put them in the pies and you freeze them, and then you cook them from frozen. And we used to make them for everyone at our church and give them out as gifts. And the holidays, you either love it or you don't. You're supposed to eat it with like a relish on top that is like a sort of tart, nice acidic cut to it with some peppers and stuff. And for me, the smell of that, the taste of that is Christmas. It is New Year. It is just this time of year. And the fact that it goes back all the way to the first, colonizers who were like, well, there's a lot of fish here. I guess if we put all the fish in a pie and cook it, we can preserve it longer. And eventually it became venison, and then it became whatever you had. So it really is. And at different regions, there's other versions of tourtière that have potato in it. So it's almost like a shepherd's pie kind of process. I've heard of eggs going in it. Ours is very much just meat pie, but my husband doesn't like it. My kids do. And that's really cool. And then for me, I love learning how to make things that are really hard. Like I just do this to myself. So my favorite thing to make at Christmas now, my own contribution that's a sort of French heritage, is madeleines. So you can often get them at Starbucks or whatever, and they're in the little packages, but you can also make them if you get the right tins and you have the right equipment, which I've learned, very important story. If you want to cook well, make sure you have the right equipment. It is a complicated recipe. It's like a hot butter recipe. So you're drizzling in blood. Good Lord, I'm thinking
That's my cooking.
drizzling in butter.
Yeah.
Oh, I have scars. I have scars. It's definitely happened before. I am the same hue as Gouda, I learned after grating my hand. But drizzling in hot butter, which makes kind of an emulsification kind of thing going on. And you have to watch it. And if you're bad, it separates, and then they don't come right. And you have a lovely little bit of lemon in it, and it's like little mini pound cakes. And watching people eat these for the first time who've never had homemade madeleines is just it's so wonderful. I love giving people a chance to taste things that are fresh and something you're used to seeing. I still remember the first loaf of bread that I ever baked. I can taste it in my head because it just changed my life. Of course, now I have celiac, so I can't eat most of the things that I bake, but
Don't follow my Instagram. Don't.
I bake for other people, and that does bring me a lot of joy.
I think for me, okay, I'm going to describe 2 things, and it's possible it's going to bleed into 3. We'll see. For Friendsgiving, one of the things that I always do every year is I'm the person who cooks the turkey. Everybody, by the time they have done Thanksgiving, is sick of turkey, and so they want something different. And I said, well, what can I do that feels North Carolina, and it gives people options, and they're not stuck like eating yet another slab of turkey breast. So I'd buy 4 frozen turkey breasts bone in, and then over the course of 3 days, I cook all 4 of them, each of them individually, in a crock pot for 8 hours. And that gets you really super moist, tender turkey breast. And I baste them throughout with a spice mix that includes chipotle, smoked paprika, cumin, garlic, and onion powder, so that it's got a little flavor, but it doesn't actually like soak in that much. And then I make pulled turkey, a la pulled pork barbecue, just like by hand, cut it up, chop it up, pull it, get it off the bone, and have 2 huge trays of pulled turkey breast. And then for that, I make 4 sauces. One of them is regular old gravy, but it's spicy gravy. So it's got some cayenne in it, and it has the chipotle in it from the turkey broth. Then I make a vindaloo sauce, And it's just straight up vindaloo, and people can like put that on their turkey or dip it or whatever they want to do.
Drink
And
it.
then I make an extra jar of vindaloo for the person who always asks for more vindaloo. Then I make a North Carolina style, Western North Carolina style, Lexington style red barbecue sauce. Oh, I make 5 sauces. And I make an Eastern style, just white vinegar with some pepper flakes in it sauce. And then I make a honey and mustard based South Carolina style barbecue sauce. And I take big mason jars of all those, and people can just like get whatever sauce they feel like. They can get all 5 if they feel like it. It's not my plate, not my business. And people can have whatever turkey experience they want to have. So that's always a lot of fun. And that means there are 4 wishbones like mixed in, so that multiple people get to have the fun of like doing the wishbone thing. So that's one thing I make. Another thing I make is I make cinnamon ginger scones every year. And with that, I use like whole wheat, and I buy, if you go to World Market, if you've got a World Market where you are, or you can buy them on Amazon, you can get pretty big bags of crystallized minced ginger for a lot cheaper than it is in the grocery store. And I make those with like a ton of minced ginger and cinnamon chips, which you have to order online, but Hershey's makes cinnamon chips that work just like chocolate chips. And those end up with, you know, a ton of butter and a ton of flour and all this good stuff and a ton of spices, a lot of cinnamon, a lot of pumpkin pie spice, a lot of nutmeg, all that. And then I bake those and then chop each scone into 2 or 3 smaller scones. So I take this huge tub of like tiny little mini scones so that people can enjoy it without feeling like they have to take all of the scone, and so that I don't have to cook 40 scones. And that's always really popular, but because there's a lot of them, people get to take some home, and the same is true of the turkey, so you get to leave other people with all the leftovers. Very important. And then the third thing I make most of the time, and I have a friend of mine who especially asks me to make this, and like at the beginning of the year, like days before the beginning of the current circumstance began, then she was recovering from surgery and asked me to make her a batch of biscuits. And I just make like simple buttermilk biscuits, but with buttermilk biscuits, the secret is you make them with buttermilk powder instead of buttermilk, because buttermilk powder makes them rise a little better, and you get
More acidic.
a little few, right? You get a little fewer calories, a little better texture. They rise a little higher. They taste just the same, and you can get that online also, or sometimes you can find it in a grocery store. But you make buttermilk biscuits, and for her, I made a batch of like fresh baked buttermilk biscuits, and then I made a batch and froze them so that she could have buttermilk biscuits sort of on demand as she recovered. And then like I, you know, drove over there and texted her and said, I'm in your driveway and I'm going to leave these by your front door. You need to move fast because some of them are frozen and some of them are hot, you know. So her husband came running right out there and got them as soon as I was backing out of the driveway. But that's something that's like really simple. It's not complicated. It doesn't take a ton of time, but it's a very comforting comfort food for a lot of people.
Those are all wonderful. Now we've had some main dishes. We've had a little bit of baking. Any other desserts or appetizers that come to mind as being something special for you, or memories or group gatherings?
I have one.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I have if you grew up in the South, there is the battle. Is it pumpkin pie or is it sweet potato pie? And I lived in a mixed family. And the worst part is that you sometimes couldn't tell, but I discovered purple sweet potatoes. So in the most pride-tastic dish ever, I make a lovely little tart, fancy ass French tart with purple sweet potato filling, not heavily spiced, because I think honey and a little bit of soured milk really makes sweet potato shine. And then put the marshmallows around the side. So you've got something that's sickeningly sweet, like Joker suit purple. And there is no way you will ever mess up your sweet potato pie and your pumpkin pie again. And you can make it with the Japanese sweet potatoes, the white skinned ones
really
that
good.
you can get like at Trader Joe's and stuff, or the Stokes purples I actually find the flavor preferable, and then you can tell the health nuts that it's not prideful, it's just antioxidants. And marshmallows, because that's the only way the sweet potatoes and marshmallows should mix.
I'm so trying that this year.
A friend of mine makes a pumpkin pie, but when she makes the pumpkin pie, she lines the bottom of the pie crust with dark chocolate chips, just like one layer of dark chocolate chips. And then she puts in the filling, bakes it. And what you get is a pumpkin pie that has this unbelievably delicious layer of dark chocolate on the bottom. It's just as thin as a cracker. It's so good.
She just layers the chips on the bottom?
Yeah, you make your crust, and then you par bake your crust, and then she just does one layer of dark chocolate chips on the bottom, and then pours in the pie filling and bakes the pie like normal.
That sounds good. The dessert that this is probably the very first thing that I taught myself to cook on my own. It was I was in high school, and I was a big fan of the Dragonlance book, so it's also geeky as well as prideful. And I was a big. I also have ADHD and also have a late diagnosis, so I didn't know that when I was young, but I knew that I totally understood Tasselhoff Burrfoot in the Dragonlance. If you're not familiar, the Kenders are basically an entire race of like elfie halflings that all have ADHD and kleptomania.
Yeah, I was gonna say kleptomania.
Kleptomania, but so much the ADHD because they only steal stuff that's shiny and interesting. But there was a recipe in Leaves from the Inn of the Last Home that Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman put together for kiffles, which is the Kender cookie. And it's a ridiculously simple recipe, but it's also time consuming. So I actually don't know how the Kender would have done this. But it's a cream cheese based cookie crust. Very little, there's no sugar in the crust of it. And these are also the first ones I started making because I can do no sugar added preserves. And you basically roll it out and fill them with like a little tiny bit of preserves with a little bit of cornstarch, fold them in half so they make cute little half moons, and bake them. And that was the first thing that I ever wanted to make. It was the first Halloween party I was invited to. I was not very popular in school. And then I went to the super overcrowded high school and met my geek tribe, which also happened to be the same people that started the very first GSA, Gay Straight Alliance, in our high school. Lots of overlap. But I wanted to make these kiffles for this Halloween party, and I actually had a whole Kender outfit. And I've been making them ever since. They're my usual Christmas cookie that I give out to people. And because they are very low sugar, I can give them out to the diabetic group of my friends. And I get requests for them. I didn't make them one year because I was sick, and they're like, no. And so my husband actually helped me make them one year just so that we could send them to a few specific people. So they're called kiffles, and I think I'm pretty sure the recipe's online now, but it's in the Leaves from the Inn of the Last Home, which is a Dragonlance source book for people who also game and are super geeky about Dragonlance.
We had a Cocker Spaniel named Tasselhoff Burrfoot. And we had two Cockers at the time, and the other one was named Bilbo Baggins, and they went like
That's awesome. I think what comes to mind for me is that I love, like, as much as I love my own sort of, ancestry food, I also love new things. And so now twice a year, although in this difficult time, I have made them once or twice because I felt like my kids kind of needed something, but I make homemade cinnamon rolls, like from scratch, overnight, yeasted cinnamon rolls with cream cheese frosting. And it's got so much butter in it, like I'm translucent by the time I'm done because it's like all over me and I'm like a greasy bag. But it when you have a cinnamon roll, like there's no Cinnabon in the world that matches that. So now my niece and nephew and my kids, I'm going to be cooking Thanksgiving dinner, providing nothing untoward happens in between now and then. And that's what they look forward to in the morning. Because I fully believe that on holidays you can start eating cookies at first thing in the morning.
Oh yeah.
But then
Yes.
what we always cap off, so in Canada, especially in Quebec, New Year's is a really big deal, and New Year's Eve is and you stay up all night eating all night long. Food comes and food comes and food comes, and at the very end we eat two things. One is called sugar pie, which is, that I learned later, it's desperation pie. I thought it was this fancy amazing thing, and I turned out it's like super poor food. It's literally brown sugar, maple syrup, eggs, and flour, but it is so delicious. And when it's warm, it kind of tastes like, well, brown sugar on ice cream. So it's really good. But the other one is the bûche de Noël, which is a Christmas log. And I love making them every year. It's a sponge cake. It's very Great British Bake Off. Like, it really has that kind of wow value, because it's got this sponge cake that you put the filling, you roll it, you got to be careful because it can break. My first few broke like crazy. I like sort of a more ganache covering instead of frosting, because I feel like frosting is, but then you make meringue mushrooms and you dust them with cocoa and you make it look as realistic as possible. And it was this sort of very old tradition of the Yule log that, you know, you're taking something from the old year, bringing it into the new year. And I have the most fun, I think, making that every year.
You can actually make pine cones out of marzipan, and then you stick
Yes.
almonds in and dust them with cocoa powder. Oh yeah, I'm all with you on the let's go full Great British Bake Off.
Yeah.
For the holidays.
My daughter is 8, and when we bake together, she insists that we both speak in a British accent at this point. So
I have a British accent at home. I cheat. I have my own Paul Hollywood walking around.
Aw.
One of the things I wanted to bring up was a book that I came across actually at Heroes Con a couple of years ago, and it has various authors, and it is from a nonprofit organization called Geeks Out, which goes to a lot of conventions and provides a welcoming, safe space for the LGBTQ community. But it's called Serving Pride, and it's not available on Amazon. You have to go to the Geeks Out website to get it. But it is basically it takes a Seder-like approach to teaching LGBTQ history and passing that on not only to people who may not have ever studied much about the history of the community, to the next generation, however you want to use it, but it is the food, the drinks, the method of preparation. There's a story that goes with each course, that then the food has a tie-in to that story, and there are participation things that go with the foods. Like, for example, in and there's a whole idea of, here are the host notes, that the history part is in the front, and then the host notes on how to actually do the kind of ceremonial dinner is in the back, along with recipes. But so, for example, one of the segments is talking about repression, 1930s to 1960s, and being on hiding and not being able to be your authentic self. And so one of the activities is there's a salad, but there's an arbitrary rule the guests must follow to get dressing on their salad. And there's one person who doles out the arbitrary rule, and you have to pass the rule before you get dressing for your salad. And it's just a participatory thing to kind of drive home the story and make it memorable. And there's another one where the cocktails are made from unlabeled bottles and ingredients, because people had to hide who they were, so you aren't sure what you're getting. And a way to make things memorable and teachable and fun for a communal dinner. But I just thought the history is written so well. It is beautifully illustrated by a number of illustrators. And between the content and the presentation, and then I love the whole idea of doing this as a communal celebration, commemoration. You can build your whole thing however you want from it. But I have no stake in the book whatsoever personally. I just came upon it, and I think everybody should know about it. But it's called Serving Pride, and you can find it at the Geeks Out website. And if you haven't seen it yet, you really, really should. And I'll look for. Go
That's
ahead.
actually going to be my Yule present to everyone who normally would have come to my house for Yule, but
Yeah.
probably won't because we're in unusual times.
Yeah, I was telling Gail yesterday when she sent me the link to that book that I run a queer book club called Queers Read for the Revolution. And we started it in December of 2016. I'm sure it's not connected to anything that had happened in November of 2016.
No.
But
Weird, just weird.
definitely not. So anyway, when we started, we tried meeting in a bar that we liked, and that was fun, except that like you can't hear anything and not everybody drinks and etc. And so then we tried meeting in a coffee shop, which was okay, except that like that was earlier in the evening and sometimes you want dinner. And we ended up moving it permanently to a particular cafe that was very welcoming of us because we figured out that some people wanted to have a meal in order to feel comfortable talking about what could be pretty contentious subjects, because we read a lot about queer history, but we also read a lot about political movements and political action. And this year we specifically wanted to read more about racial justice issues. And so these can be pretty traumatic books that we're reading. And some people wanted a meal. They wanted to be able to sit down and have dinner in order to feel comfortable. And some people wanted to be able to get dessert. And that was important to them. And some people wanted to be able to get tea, and that's also very important to them. I figured you'd be into that, Natania. And and some people wanted to get a glass of wine. That would be me. And, in a nice little cafe, in a place where we could all have a meal together as the start of our discussion. It was really important. And so one day when we were able to meet again in person, then we are definitely going to do that dinner.
Yeah, I love that.
And the other thing I found, because I also tried to hold a meetup group in a coffee shop for a while, is every time they pulled a latte, it was like being on the tarmac at an airport when jets were leaving. Those are incredibly loud. And we finally just ended up stopping and everybody started making the lights signal. Well, folks, we are at the end of our hour. This has been fantastic and yummy, and now I'm really hungry. And so let's go around and let everybody know where they can find you, where they can find you online. And then when this goes live, I will tag you, of course. And if you want to drop some of those recipes in the comments, I'm sure our watchers would love to have them. Rachel, start us off.
Okay, you can find me at rachelecarr.com or on Amazon if you want, and you can reach me on all the socials at Total Recar. And if you get where my handle comes from, you will understand all of my writing instantly. So yeah, and my recipes I do post in my newsletter from time to time, which you can sign up for on my website.
Great. Natania?
I'm Natania Barron, and very conveniently at nataniabarron.com. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for giving me a relatively unusual name. And at Natania Barron on Twitter, at Natania Barron on Instagram, and at Natania Books on TikTok. And I also do post recipes quite often. I actually briefly wrote a food memoir at one point in my life, which I think I need to keep adding to, but always happy to connect with people who love the language of food.
Cool. Trisha?
I am Trisha J. Woolridge. You can find me at anovelfriend.com, ANOVELFRIND.com. That covers both my editing and my writing. But if you just Google Trisha J. Woolridge, you'll still find me. I'm under either Trisha Woolridge or Novel Friend on all the usual social medias, so you can find me that way as well. And you can get my books at pretty much any independent local bookstore, preferable, but also on the Big A.
Great. Michael?
You can find me at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. My parents were not creative with my name. You can also find me on Facebook as Michael G. Williams Author. You can find me on Twitter as @McManlyPants right there behind me. And in the comments, I'm going to throw in a recipe for cornbread and a recipe for old-fashioned dressing because the town where I grew up does not deserve to keep its secrets.
Awesome. And you can find me at Gail Z Martin or .com and morganbryce.com. Just remember the Z in Gail Z Martin, or you'll get somebody who writes inspirational fiction, and I write about vampires, and it's just not the same. Everything on all the usual social platforms is a combination, is one of those names or with an abbreviation like GZ Martin. I'm pretty easy to find out there. Folks, thank you so much for being with us today. Great conversation. I think we could just keep talking food for a long time.
Oh,
but my
yeah.
stomach's rumbling,
Oh, yeah.
so. And thank you, folks, for being with us and watching this and being with us in ConTinual. Until next time, we'll see you online. Take care.